So this is the beginning of a series on the Italian Renaissance. Today we'll talk about the origins of the Italian Renaissance. Now, one thing to keep in mind about the Renaissance in Italy is that when Rome fell apart, when the ancient Roman world fell apart, it fell apart particularly in the West. The Byzantine world did continue. Trade continued there. They continued to have a vibrant economy relative to what was going on in Rome. You also had the rise of the Islamic world, and that would be an advanced civilization compared with what's going on in the West. Now, the one exception, or somewhat of an exception, to the decline of trade and commerce in the West was in Italy. And part of that is because the Italian cities were close to Byzantium, close to some of the places in the Muslim world like Spain and somewhat close to Arabia. And so there was still trade going on between Italian cities, especially Venice, with places in the Byzantine and the Muslim world, and even as far off as China through those places. So at a time when the Western world, long-distance trade had really fallen apart, and what you're really looking at is the rise of feudal economy, manorialism, and really you don't have the kind of vibrant trade, anything like it, that had existed in the Roman world. Still, you have something of that continuing because of the Italians and their proximity to Byzantium, to the Islamic world, and both of those empires, kingdoms, are still trading with the Chinese, and so you still do have long-distance trade that at least the Italians are connected with. So Venice is going to continue to gain wealth through their commerce in this trade industry. For trade, what was the most productive way to do trade was by sea. So, of course, the Italians are right there on a peninsula, and they're able to trade by sea rather quickly and easily. You also got to keep in mind that the Byzantines still ruled over part of Italy. So they're very close in proximity. So there's still going to be trade going on, and that's going to have some effects that we'll talk about here in a minute. So this is an image here of people traveling. And there's going to be a reason for travel besides the matter of ships traveling in and out of places like Venice for the purpose of trade. People are going to be traveling to Italy for other reasons as well. And those will involve visits to holy sites. So here we have a picture of people visiting some of the holy churches in Rome in the Middle Ages. And that was an important thing for people, to make a pilgrimage to see some important sites and to see some of the relics that the church possessed. Relics were considered a big thing. If you had a bone of St. Peter, that was thought to have some special properties, and just to be able to see it, probably wouldn't get to touch it, but just to be close to such a thing had some special significance to people in the Middle Ages. To view places in Rome and see where Peter actually set foot, to see where the Apostle Paul might have spent some of his time, those were things that people found very valuable. So a lot of people would make a long pilgrimage all the way to Rome because of the value of these holy sites. Well, that meant that you have people traveling and spending money. They're going to have to stay in some sort of an inn. They're going to buy stuff. You're going to be able to sell things to rich people who are traveling. Now, you'll have poor travelers also, but it's going to be especially people who have money that can afford to make these sort of trips. And so they're going to spend money. And that money is going to come into Rome. So Rome's also going to have taxes that come in because Rome is the central church, and so people are going to spend money to support the central church. And so that there's going to be wealth coming in and out of Rome. And all the other cities that you have to travel through on your way to Rome, they're going to benefit as well. It's the same as if you're hosting the Super Bowl in your city. Well, a lot of wealth is going to come into the city during that time because of all the travel, all the money that people spend when they come to these sporting events. They're not just going to pay to go to the event. They're also going to go to hotels. They're going to go to restaurants. They're going to buy souvenirs. All sorts of things are going to be connected with. So generally, a lot of money is changing hands when there's a lot of travel. So this is an image of people making a pilgrimage, and you got to think this is a major commitment to make a pilgrimage. Say you're going all the way from Germany to Italy, you're going from England to Italy. These are major trips, but people are willing to make these kind of journeys because of how much they believed in the significance of the church in Rome, and they believed in the significance of these relics. People are going to make pilgrimages also to see the site where Thomas Becket was murdered in a later time period. That's connected with King Henry II. Pilgrimages are a significant thing in the medieval period. Also in the Islamic world, pilgrimages will be an important thing. Not only making the pilgrimage to Mecca and to Medina, but to other sites that were considered important religiously. Another image of people making a pilgrimage. Now, this is another way you might make the trip, is by sea. And this is something to consider too, is if you're on a ship and you're trying to make a pilgrimage by sea and you're a fairly wealthy person, well, one thing you're going to have to worry about are pirates. So as these sort of things are taking place, as people are engaged in this long-distance trade, there's going to be a need for increased security. That's the kind of thing that will be provided by the Carolingian Empire. When they're emerging, you start to get more secure roads, more secure travel, because the Carolingians have armies and they can help to provide that. When the Vikings come in, when the Saracens, the people of Hungary, when they're coming in and invading and things are falling apart, that's going to make it more difficult. So that you always got to keep that in mind. One of the important things for trade, one of the important things for the Middle Ages to really recover is you're going to have law and order, or people are going to be afraid to make these kind of journeys. But still, even in the midst of difficulty, people do make these journeys, and a lot of times they don't make it back because they were difficult. So this is a picture of what trade might look like in a medieval city, somewhere like Rome or Florence or Venice, where people are coming in and out. They're needing to stay places. They're going to buy things. So you got people that are going to sell you things on the roadside, just right outside of their houses, because a lot of times for people, when they have some kind of a trade, their house is also where they do business. So upstairs is where they sleep, downstairs is where they do their business, and it's going to be dependent for them on people continuing to come in and do business, and those people need to be people that are traveling from foreign lands, especially the wealthy. another image of what bustling city might look like. And all these people are people with money and people who can help to make the economy work. Now, along with that, you're going to have the rise, the necessity really, of lawyers. Because with all the trade that's happening, you're going to have lawyers to write up contracts for things like, let's say you decided that you wanted to go into business where you were going to get a ship and go and trade with the Byzantine world, with the Muslim world. You wanted to sail off, buy up some stuff, and bring it back to Venice and sell it. Or you're going to take some products from Venice and go and sell them in these other places in the world that have money that can buy things. Well, you might not have money. You might have to make some kind of a trade deal where somebody else backs you, and you're going to have some kind of a contract. Well, you're going to need a lawyer to draw up the contract. What are the terms going to be? What happens if you get a ship that somebody else finances and you crash at sea? And then you come back and you don't have the ship anymore and you didn't make any profit. What benefit is there for the person who is financing you? What are they supposed to get out of this deal? They need to get something out of it, or it's not going to be worth it for them. So they need to have some kind of security, somebody to guarantee what the terms are when you make deals like this. And there's going to be other kinds of deals like this where, somebody will want to go into business where they'll say, I'm going to take these goods and go and trade them here, and there's a certain amount of risk involved. And that doesn't have to be by sea. You could say, I'm going to go to England as commerce starts to pick up, as towns start to pick up. You say, well, I'm going to go to England and I'm going to take some of the wool here from Florence and maybe take it off there and we'll make some nice clothing here in Florence with the wool industry we have. We're going to go sell some of this stuff in England, or maybe over in France, because in England they're also going to have their own wool industry, though they tend to sell their wool to other places like Flanders, and then they turn it into cloth. But people could come up with all kinds of ideas, and they're going to need to have lawyers, and that's going to mean practical education. And that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind about Italy and why the Renaissance begins in Italy, is because education was still necessary. Because of the need for trade and lawyers to draw up contracts connected with trade, you still needed to have education that was of a practical nature. In most of the world, in Western Europe at the time, if there was education happening, it was of a purely religious nature. You were reading religious texts, the church fathers, reading the Bible. Often you're copying down old texts, but you're not really engaging in more practical education, like getting a degree as a lawyer or training to be a lawyer. You don't necessarily get a degree in the way that we think of it today, but that practical kind of education was needed. And that's part of why humanism will arise, is because people will be engaged in education in a different kind of way, as we'll see as we continue talking about the Renaissance. There's also going to be a need for banking, because people are going to need to borrow money and be able to have access to that if they're going to start any kind of a new venture. Otherwise, the only people who would be able to really engage in trade are people who are already wealthy. But people want to start up new ventures. And even people who have wealth, they might want to borrow more so that they can do something more extravagant than they had been able to do before, expand their business. The church may want to borrow money to build some great cathedral. Well, you're going to need trade to make that possible. You're going to need banking where you can borrow, and the bankers are going to need to have some benefit to that. And that's going to be an issue in the Middle Ages, because for a long time in the Middle Ages, for most of the Middle Ages, it was considered sinful to be a banker, because that involved charging interest. And interest was thought to be something very bad, because you're loaning a certain amount of money and then you get back more money. Well, that's really necessary for a banker. If there's any benefit to being a banker, it's because you have some ability to make profit, and you have to have something to do about the people who aren't going to pay back, because some people aren't going to pay back. Something will happen and they won't be able to. So you have to make some profit off of the loans that you're making, otherwise there's no benefit. So for the longest time it's going to be the Jewish people in the Middle Ages who will be involved in banking, because the church condemns loaning money at interest, but they don't really care if the Jewish people do that, because the Jewish people were not Christian. And so that's going to be the people who are involved with that. Well, that's going to change in Italy. You're going to have some important banking families that emerge, and especially the Medici family. The Medici family, beginning with Cosimo de' Medici, is going to be a family that's very much involved in banking. And we'll see a lot of wealth is going to come in for the Medicis because of the importance of banking, how many people rely on that, and because of that, the Medici are going to become a very powerful family. They're going to practically run Florence because of how much wealth and influence they have. So they're going to be a kind of controversial family. There'll be some good and some bad, but for the good or for the bad, for better or for worse, they're going to be an important part of Italian politics for a number of centuries. So that's something that we'll look at in next video. It's the Medici family. We'll also be talking about humanism and what that involved, and we'll eventually get into Italian art and how that's beginning here in the early stage of the Italian Renaissance. That's really what we're looking at, is the beginnings of the Italian Renaissance in the 14th century, especially, and then a little bit into the 15th century as well. Thank you.